Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sleep Space. Tonight, we will talk about something fascinating. Where do you go when you stop thinking? What happens to awareness when the mind becomes silent? It's one of the deepest mysteries of consciousness. If you've ever had moments of complete stillness, no thoughts, no inner dialogue, you might have wondered, where did you go in that moment? Were you still there? Or did something vanish? The mind is constantly producing thoughts, like a never ending stream of words and images. Most people live their entire lives without ever experiencing true mental silence. Even when we think we're quiet, there's usually a background hum. Little plans, random memories, songs stuck in our head. But what happens if that stream stops completely? Does awareness disappear with it, or does it remain, clear, still, and alive? To answer this, we need to understand how the brain creates thought, what awareness really means, and whether consciousness depends on thinking or exists independently. Modern neuroscience tells us that thoughts are patterns of electrical and chemical activity moving through neural networks. Every idea, memory, or plan is the result of neurons firing in specific patterns. These patterns can be observed with brain scans, and interestingly, even when you're not consciously thinking, the brain is never completely silent. There's always some background activity, like the hum of a machine that never turns off. But here's the fascinating part. Brain activity does not necessarily equal consciousness. For example, during deep meditation, scans show reduced activity in the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-referential thinking, daydreaming, and internal narration. Yet meditators often report feeling more awake, more present, and more aware during these states of mental quiet. This suggests that thinking and awareness are not the same thing. So, what is awareness? It's not a thought, it's not an image, a word, or a memory. It's the capacity to notice those things. When you hear a sound, the awareness is the space in which that sound is experienced. When you see an object, awareness is what makes the seeing possible. But when thoughts stop, what remains? Is it blankness or something deeper? Philosophers and scientists have debated this for centuries. Some argue that awareness is just another function of the brain, and when mental content stops, awareness stops too. In this view, silence equals nothingness. Others argue that awareness is the fundamental ground of experience, the screen on which all thoughts, sensations, and perceptions appear. If that's true, then when the mind is silent, awareness remains as pure presence. To test this for yourself, try a simple experiment. Close your eyes and stop thinking. Most people can't do this for more than a few seconds. Thoughts rush in automatically, like waves returning to the shore. Why? Because the mind is conditioned to generate thought. It does this to solve problems, predict the future, and maintain your sense of identity. If thinking were to stop completely, even for a moment, the sense of I that is built from memories and language might feel like it disappears. But does it? Many who experience mental silence describe something extraordinary, a sense of vastness, of being aware without being a person, without labels or boundaries. This is where things get interesting from a scientific perspective. During deep states of meditation, brain activity shifts dramatically. The areas linked to the sense of self, the default mode network, become quiet. Yet subjects report heightened clarity, timelessness, and peace. In some traditions, this is called pure awareness or consciousness without content. It feels like you are still there, but there are no thoughts to define who you are. From a neurological point of view, this might be explained by the brain reducing its predictive processing. Normally, the brain is a prediction machine, constantly modeling the world and your place in it. When these predictions stop, what remains is raw sensory experience and awareness itself. In fact, studies using EEG and fMRI show that during these states, brain waves often slow down into alpha and theta patterns, associated with relaxation and expanded perception. But here's the big question. Does this mean awareness is just a state of the brain, or is it something more fundamental? If awareness depends on neural activity, then when the brain stops processing, awareness should vanish. Yet subjective reports say otherwise. People feel intensely present, sometimes more alive than ever. Some even describe these moments as glimpses into something beyond the brain, something timeless. Could awareness be a fundamental property of reality, like space and time? Some physicists and philosophers have suggested this. Panpsychism, for example, is the idea that consciousness is not produced by matter, but is inherent in it, that awareness exists at every level, from atoms to galaxies. If that's true, then when your personal mind becomes silent, what remains might be the universal awareness that was always there, independent of thought. Of course, science hasn't confirmed this. It's still a mystery. But what we do know is that mental silence changes how we experience the world. Without thought, there is no judgment, no past, no future. There is only what is happening right now. Time seems to dissolve because the mind creates time by thinking about what was and what will be. When that stops, only this moment exists, and it feels infinite. Imagine floating in space with no sound, no movement, no labels, just awareness of being. That's what many meditators describe. It's not sleep because you're awake. It's not unconsciousness because you're aware. It's something entirely different, a silent, vibrant presence beyond words. This brings us back to the question, where do you go when you stop thinking? Maybe you don't go anywhere. Maybe you remain right here, but without the filter of thought. Or maybe, in those moments, you merge with something vast and universal. The truth is, we don't know for sure, but the mystery itself is beautiful, and it invites us to explore what we really are when the mind is silent. When we look closer at the brain during thoughtless states, the patterns are striking. Neuroscientists have studied experienced meditators who can enter states of mental silence at will. Their brain scans show decreased activity in regions like the medial prefrontal cortex, which is linked to self-referential thinking. At the same time, sensory processing areas remain active. This suggests that the brain is still functioning. It's just not producing the usual chatter that creates the sense of a separate self. In fact, studies on mindfulness and deep meditation show something paradoxical. When the default mode network quiets down, people report feeling more connected, not less. They describe an expansion of awareness, as if the boundaries between me and the world dissolve. This challenges the assumption that a strong sense of self is necessary for awareness. It seems that when the self drops away, awareness does not vanish. It becomes more open. But let's step back. Why does the mind resist silence in the first place? The brain evolved to keep us alive, and one of its main tools is prediction. It's constantly thinking ahead, planning and recalling past experiences to prepare for danger or opportunity. This means the mind is almost never idle, even when there's no immediate need. That's why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. It goes against millions of years of conditioning. Yet when you do manage to stop the stream of thought, something extraordinary happens. Perception becomes sharper. Colors seem brighter, sounds feel richer, the taste of food becomes more vivid. Why? Because most of the time, we're half absorbed in thought and only partially engaged with reality. When thinking ceases, all of your awareness is available for direct experience. This raises a fascinating point. If awareness exists without thought, then you, as a thinker, might not be the core of consciousness. The voice in your head, the constant narrative, might just be a tool, a useful one, but not the essence of who you are. The essence could be the silent awareness that remains when thought stops. Philosophically, this connects to ancient traditions like Advaita Vedanta, Zen Buddhism, and Taoism. These teachings have long suggested that our true nature is pure awareness, and that thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky of consciousness. The sky doesn't disappear when the clouds move on. It remains vast and open. Science is now beginning to explore this idea, though it uses different language. Instead of pure awareness, neuroscientists talk about baseline consciousness or background awareness. But can we measure awareness itself? That's the challenge. We can measure brain activity, but awareness is subjective. It's an experience, not an object. This is what philosophers call the hard problem of consciousness. How and why subjective experience arises from physical processes. When you stop thinking, you confront this mystery directly. You are aware, but aware of what? A blank field? Or something infinite? Interestingly, experiments in sensory deprivation offer clues. When people spend hours in a float tank, where light, sound, and touch are minimized, they report entering states of deep mental silence. Some describe it as peaceful emptiness, others as a boundless presence. This suggests that when external input and internal thought both fade, awareness remains as a kind of luminous stillness. Now let's bring in another angle: brain waves. During ordinary waking thought, the brain produces beta waves, fast, busy frequencies. When you relax or meditate, these slow down into alpha and theta waves, associated with calmness and introspection. In the deepest meditative states, gamma waves sometimes surge, which is fascinating because gamma is linked to high-level integration of brain activity. Some researchers believe this reflects a unified state of consciousness, a brain functioning as a whole, not fragmented by constant thought. There's also evidence from near-death experiences. People who've been clinically dead for a short time and revived often report a state beyond thought, a clear, vivid awareness without mental chatter. While these accounts are controversial and not definitive proof of anything beyond the brain, they hint that consciousness might not be entirely dependent on thinking. But even without going to those extremes, you can explore this yourself. Next time you have a quiet moment, try noticing the space between thoughts. When one thought ends and before the next one begins, there's a tiny gap. That gap is silent, yet you are still aware. If you can extend that gap, even for a few seconds, you'll taste what it's like to be present without thinking. Some people find this frightening at first. The mind is used to defining reality, and when it stops, there's nothing to hold on to. But if you stay with it, something shifts. You realize you don't need thoughts to exist. You are awareness itself, watching thoughts come and go like waves on an ocean. The ocean doesn't depend on the waves. It's always there, vast and deep. This is where science and spirituality start to meet. Neuroscience explains how thoughts arise and fade, but it can't fully explain why awareness persists when thoughts are gone. Spiritual traditions have explored this territory for thousands of years. using direct experience as the laboratory. They say that when the mind is silent, you touch the essence of consciousness, the same awareness that was present when you were a child, and even before you had language. Does that mean awareness is eternal? That's an open question. Some scientists think awareness is an emergent property of complex brains, and when the brain stops, awareness ends. Others argue that consciousness is fundamental, and the brain is like a receiver, not the source. If that's true, then mental silence might be a glimpse into the universal field of awareness that underlies everything. What's certain is that silence changes your relationship with life. Without thought, there's no problem, no identity, no time, just this. And in that simplicity, many find a profound sense of peace. So, where do you go when you stop thinking? Maybe you don't go anywhere at all. Maybe you arrive fully in the only place that truly exists, now. When we look deeper into the nature of thought, something surprising emerges. Most of the time, we are not consciously choosing our thoughts at all. They appear on their own, uninvited, like pop-up notifications in the mind. You might believe you are thinking because you want to, but watch closely, and you'll see that thoughts arise automatically. If you could fully control them, you would never have an unpleasant or unwanted thought. Yet they come anyway, shaped by habits, memories, and conditioning. This automatic nature of thought has been confirmed by neuroscience. In studies using real-time brain scans, researchers have found that activity predicting a decision can appear in the brain several seconds before a person becomes consciously aware of making that decision. This suggests that thought is largely an unconscious process, and consciousness often comes in later, claiming ownership of something that has already happened. If that's true, then what happens when this automatic process slows down or stops? Does the sense of self dissolve along with it? Consider how identity is constructed. Everything you believe about yourself, your name, your history, your personality, exists as a collection of thoughts. Without them, who are you? If you stop thinking even for a moment, the usual reference points vanish. But awareness doesn't vanish. You still know that you exist, even if you don't define what you are. This is a profound realization, because it shows that identity and awareness are not the same thing. Modern psychology has begun to explore these distinctions. There's a concept called meta-awareness, which is the ability to notice your own mental processes. When you realize you are thinking, you step into a higher level of awareness beyond thought. Practices like mindfulness train this capacity. But what happens when you go further? When there is nothing to observe because the stream of thought itself has ended? Does meta-awareness become pure awareness with no object to hold on to? Many meditators say yes. They describe it as being without doing, a state where awareness simply rests in itself. From a scientific perspective, these experiences often correspond with shifts in brain function. For example, researchers studying advanced practitioners of meditation have recorded unusual patterns of brain activity during these states. In some cases, there is a marked decrease in activity in the parietal lobes, which help define the boundaries of the body in space. When this quieting occurs, people often report a feeling of merging with their surroundings or even with the entire universe. At the same time, there may be an increase in coherence between distant parts of the brain, suggesting a more integrated mode of functioning. These changes are not random. They indicate that mental silence is not the absence of brain activity, but a different configuration of it. It's like shifting from the busy traffic of a city to the calm stillness of a lake at dawn. Everything slows down, but something essential remains. Let's also examine what happens to time when thinking stops. Normally, our sense of time is tied to mental activity. We recall the past and anticipate the future, creating a timeline that gives structure to our lives. But when thought ceases, this structure collapses. There is no past or future to think about, only the immediacy of now. People in these states often describe time as vanishing altogether or expanding into an eternal present. This isn't an illusion caused by boredom or excitement. It's a direct consequence of the absence of mental projection. Without thought, time as we know it cannot exist, because time lives in thought. This has enormous implications for how we experience reality. Most of our stress comes from thoughts about what happened or what might happen. In silence, those thoughts are gone. What remains is simply what is. For some, this brings a deep sense of relief, even bliss. For others, it can feel unsettling because the familiar markers of identity and time are missing. But if you stay with it, the simplicity becomes luminous. From a philosophical angle, this connects to the concept of pure consciousness events, studied by researchers like Robert Foreman. These are moments when all content of consciousness, thoughts, perceptions, emotions, drops away, leaving only awareness. People who experience these events often struggle to describe them because language depends on contrast and objects. How do you describe something that has no form, no boundary, no feature except presence itself? Yet they insist the experience was real, even more real than ordinary perception. Some theorists propose that these experiences point to a fundamental property of consciousness. It is self-luminous. That is, it does not need an object to exist. Normally, we know we are aware because we are aware of something, a sound, a thought, a sensation. But in these states, awareness knows itself without any object. It is simply aware that it is. This is radically different from the way we usually function, and it suggests that awareness may be the ground of all experience, not just a byproduct of thought. To explore this idea further, let's look at an analogy. Imagine a movie screen. Normally, you focus on the images projected onto it, the scenes, the colours, the movement. But the screen itself is always there, even when the movie ends. In the same way, thoughts and perceptions are like the images, and awareness is the screen. When the images stop, the screen remains. Most of us never notice the screen because we're so absorbed in the movie. Silence reveals it. But is this just an inner trick of the brain? Could the feeling of timeless, boundless awareness be nothing more than a neurological anomaly? That's a valid question, and one that science cannot yet answer definitively. However, the transformative effects of these states are well documented. People who experience them often report lasting changes, reduced anxiety, greater compassion, and a sense of connection to something larger than themselves. These outcomes suggest that mental silence is not merely an absence, but a doorway to a deeper mode of being. Interestingly, similar states appear across cultures and eras. Mystics, sages, and contemplatives from every tradition describe the same essential features: stillness, clarity, unity, and an ineffable presence beyond thought. They use different words: nirvana, samadhi, the Tao, the kingdom of heaven, but the core experience seems universal. Could it be that these states are not cultural constructs, but glimpses of a reality that underlies all human experience? Modern neuroscience has begun to take these reports seriously, not as metaphysical claims, but as data about the capacities of the human mind. Researchers now study meditation not only for its health benefits, but also for what it reveals about the nature of consciousness, and the findings are reshaping our understanding. Far from being a passive state, mental silence may represent a highly ordered, coherent mode of brain function, one that could unlock new potentials for creativity, resilience, and well-being. But beyond the science, there is the personal question: what does it feel like to exist without thought? Can you imagine living, even briefly, without the constant commentary in your head? No labels, no judgments, no rehearsing of the past or the future, just the raw, unfiltered presence of life as it is. Some describe it as stepping out of a noisy room into a vast, open field. Others say it feels like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were dreaming. To approach this, you don't need to adopt any belief system. You can simply experiment. The next time you find yourself caught in a loop of thoughts, pause and ask, what is my next thought going to be? That question often creates a gap, a moment of waiting in which no thought comes. In that gap, you taste mental silence, and in that silence, you may sense something subtle but undeniable. You are still here, even without thoughts. That realization can change everything. It shows that you are not the voice in your head. You are the awareness that notices the voice. And when the voice stops, you don't disappear. In fact, you might feel more alive than ever, because life is no longer filtered through concepts. It is experienced directly, in its full immediacy and wonder. The mind's tendency to generate thought is often compared to a river that never stops flowing. But what if we could look beneath the surface of that river and see what lies at the bottom? When thoughts slow down and eventually stop, the surface becomes calm, like a still pond, and in that stillness something remarkable can be observed: the presence of awareness without the turbulence of concepts. To understand this more deeply, we need to examine the mechanics of mental activity. Thoughts are not random sparks of energy, they follow patterns. Neuroscience has identified networks in the brain that correspond to specific types of thinking. The default mode network, as mentioned earlier, is heavily involved in self-referential thought, memories, daydreams, and inner narration. When you stop thinking, this network reduces its activity dramatically. But other systems, like those involved in sensory perception, may remain active or even become more engaged. This shift explains why silence often heightens your sense of the present moment. Interestingly, some researchers believe that the sense of I we normally experience is a kind of simulation created by the brain. It's a useful model for organizing experience and planning for the future, but it's not the essence of consciousness. When thinking stops, this simulation collapses. At first, this can feel disorienting, as if something essential is missing. But then comes the realization: what remains is not nothingness. It is awareness, vast and undeniable, free from the constraints of identity. This insight challenges the common assumption that awareness depends on thought. If you have ever been deeply absorbed in a moment, watching a sunset, listening to music, or gazing at the stars, you may have noticed that your inner commentary fades, yet your experience becomes more vivid, not less. This suggests that thinking is not the source of awareness. In fact, it often distracts from it. Silence doesn't diminish life, it reveals it. Let's explore the brain dynamics of such states in more detail. During ordinary waking life, the brain operates in what neuroscientists call the default mode. This mode is energy intensive and highly active, consuming a large share of the brain's resources even when you're not doing anything in particular. It's the backdrop of constant mental chatter. When you stop thinking, the brain shifts away from this default state. Functional MRI studies show increased connectivity between regions that usually operate separately, such as the networks involved in attention and those involved in sensory awareness. This integration may explain why the world feels more immediate and unified when the mind is silent. Some experiments have gone further by comparing novice meditators with experienced practitioners. In one study, long-term meditators who could enter states of thoughtless awareness on demand showed unusual brainwave patterns. High-amplitude gamma oscillations that were synchronized across large areas of the cortex. Gamma waves are often linked to insight and holistic perception. This suggests that silence is not a dull state of inactivity, but a heightened state of integration and clarity. From a psychological perspective, the implications are profound. Much of our suffering comes from identification with thought, the belief that the voice in our head is who we are. When thinking stops, that identification loosens. This can lead to what some call ego dissolution, a temporary suspension of the sense of self. Far from being harmful, this experience is often liberating. People describe feeling lighter, freer, and more connected to the world around them. They realize that the self they clung to was a story, and that the absence of that story is not death, but awakening. The experience of mental silence also raises questions about perception. Normally, what we see, hear, and feel is heavily filtered by thought. We don't just experience reality, we interpret it, judge it, and categorize it. When thought stops, those filters drop away, and perception becomes raw and direct. A tree is no longer a tree, it is a living presence, vibrant and luminous. A sound is not labeled as music or noise, it is pure vibration in awareness. This shift can feel like entering a new dimension, even though nothing external has changed. The change is entirely internal, yet it transforms everything. Historically, these states have been regarded as sacred or mystical, but they are also natural. Every human being has the capacity to experience them. In fact, you may have had glimpses without realizing it. Those moments when time seemed to stand still, when you were so present that thought could not intrude. Perhaps it happened while watching waves crash on the shore, or in the quiet after a snowfall, or during an intense creative flow. These are windows into what life is like without the overlay of thought. Science has only begun to map this territory, but one thing is clear: the absence of thought does not mean the absence of consciousness. On the contrary, it often feels like a more fundamental form of consciousness, one that is less fragmented and more whole. This has led some researchers to propose that consciousness might have layers. The thinking mind is one layer, useful for navigating the world. Beneath it lies a layer of pure awareness, normally hidden by mental noise. When thought stops, that deeper layer shines through. Philosophically, this aligns with what some traditions call the ground of being. It is not an object, not a thing you can point to, because it is the condition for all things. You can't see awareness the way you see an object, because awareness is what makes seeing possible. When thoughts fall silent, you don't find awareness as a separate entity. You find that it is what you are. This realization can be unsettling because it undermines our habitual sense of control. We like to think we are in charge of our thoughts, that we are the thinker. But in silence, it becomes obvious that thoughts come and go on their own, like clouds drifting across the sky. You are not the clouds, you are the sky, and the sky is unaffected by the passing weather. The question remains, why does the mind resist silence so strongly? One reason is fear. The mind equates its own activity with existence. If thought stops, it feels like dying. But awareness is not afraid because it is not limited to any form. It was there before the first thought, and it remains when the last thought fades. To taste that timelessness, even briefly, is to see through the illusion that you are your thoughts. Imagine what life would be like if you could rest in that awareness even as thoughts arise. Thoughts would become tools, not tyrants. They would serve their purpose without dominating your experience. You would think when necessary, and when not, you would return to the vast stillness that is always present. This is what many contemplative traditions describe as liberation, not escape from life, but freedom within it. Modern research supports the benefits of cultivating this capacity. People who practice meditation or other methods of quieting the mind often show lower levels of stress hormones, improved immune function, and greater emotional resilience. But beyond these measurable effects, there is a deeper transformation, the recognition that peace is not something you create by arranging circumstances. It is what remains when the mind is quiet. Thought is an extraordinary tool. It allows us to plan, analyze, create, and communicate. Without it, human civilization would not exist. But as powerful as it is, thought is limited. It can only work with concepts, symbols, and memory. It cannot touch reality directly. It can only represent it. The word tree is not a tree. The memory of yesterday is not yesterday. Thought is a map, not the territory. When the mind is constantly active, we live more in the map than in the actual landscape of life. We mistake descriptions for reality. We think about living rather than fully living. When thought stops, the map disappears, and we are confronted with the raw immediacy of what is. This can be startling because we are so accustomed to navigating the world through concepts. But it can also be liberating because the world without mental filters is infinitely richer than any concept of it. Neuroscience has shown that the brain spends much of its energy predicting what will happen next based on past experience. This predictive coding is efficient for survival, but it also creates a kind of virtual reality in our heads. We rarely perceive the present moment as it is. We perceive our brain's best guess, shaped by memory and expectation. Mental silence disrupts this process. It suspends prediction and allows perception to unfold without interference. The result is a sense of freshness, as if seeing the world for the first time. This state is not unique to meditation. It can occur spontaneously in moments of awe, beauty, or danger, anytime the usual narrative breaks down. Consider what happens when you witness a breathtaking sunset or hear music that moves you to tears. For a few seconds, thought stops. You are not analyzing or labeling. You are simply present, absorbed in the experience. These moments are fleeting, but they point to something profound. The deepest experiences of life often happen when the mind is silent. Psychologists call this the flow state, a condition in which action and awareness merge, self-consciousness fades, and time seems to vanish. Athletes, artists, and musicians often enter this state during peak performance. While flow is not the same as complete mental silence, it shares a key feature: the absence of the inner commentator. The mind is not chattering about the past or future, it is fully engaged with the now. This suggests that the capacity for silence is built into the human mind. It is not an exotic ability, but a natural one. The benefits of silence extend beyond the subjective sense of peace. Studies have found that practices designed to quiet the mind, can lead to measurable changes in the brain. Long-term meditators often show increased thickness in the prefrontal cortex, associated with attention and self-regulation, and in the insula, linked to awareness of internal states. These structural changes suggest that mental silence is not a passive state, but an active training of the brain toward greater stability and clarity. One of the most intriguing findings comes from research on the sense of self. In experiments where participants are trained to focus on pure awareness rather than on thoughts or sensations, activity in the default mode network decreases as expected. But more interestingly, connectivity between attention networks and sensory areas increases. This means that when the self-referential system quiets down, awareness does not collapse. It becomes more attuned to the present moment. The I dissolves, but experience continues, vivid and immediate. This raises an important question. If awareness persists without the sense of self, then who or what is aware? This is where language reaches its limit. Any answer framed as someone or something falls back into thought. The best we can do is point to the experience itself, awareness without an owner, like an open sky without boundaries. It is not a thing among other things. It is the field in which all things appear. Philosophers have long wrestled with this mystery. In Western thought, figures like Meister Eckhart and Plotinus spoke of a ground beyond concepts, a pure presence beyond being and non-being. In Eastern traditions, it is called Brahman, the Tao, or simply emptiness. Not a void of nothingness, but a fullness beyond form. These descriptions sound abstract, but they all refer to the same discovery. When thought ceases, what remains is not blank, but luminous, not absent, but profoundly present. From a scientific perspective, these claims may seem unverifiable, yet they are based on repeatable experiences accessible to anyone willing to explore the silence of their own mind. This is why contemplative traditions have always emphasized direct observation over belief. You don't have to accept anyone's theory. You can test it for yourself by noticing what happens when the next thought ends and the mind does not immediately replace it. In that gap, however brief, there is a taste of stillness. That taste is the beginning of a deeper journey. Interestingly, silence does not eliminate thought forever. Thoughts will return because that is their nature. The goal is not to suppress them, but to see them clearly, to recognize that they are appearances in awareness, not the substance of awareness itself. When this recognition deepens, you no longer feel compelled to follow every thought. You can let them come and go like leaves floating on a stream. In this sense, mental silence is not the absence of thought, but the absence of identification with thought. What does this mean for daily life? It means that peace is not dependent on circumstances. You can be in the middle of chaos and still rest in the quiet center of awareness. This is not a theory, it is a skill, one that can be cultivated through practice. Even a few moments of silence each day can shift your perspective, making you less reactive, more present, and more compassionate. Modern culture rarely values silence. We are surrounded by noise, literal noise from machines and screens, and mental noise from constant stimulation. We fill every gap with information, entertainment, or conversation. Yet beneath this surface turbulence, there is a reservoir of stillness available to all of us. To tap into it, you don't need to escape to a cave or a monastery. You only need to pause and listen, not to sounds, but to the space in which sounds arise. That space is awareness itself, always present, always silent, even when the mind is busy. When you discover this space, life takes on a different texture. Ordinary experiences become extraordinary because they are no longer filtered through the fog of concepts. A simple breath feels miraculous. A bird's song is heard in its purity, without the thought bird getting in the way. This is not a mystical fantasy. It is the natural state of mind when freed from compulsive thinking. And the more you rest in this state, the more you realize that the silence is not something you create, it is what you are. When exploring the question of what happens to awareness when thought ceases, we encounter another fascinating territory: the states of consciousness that occur naturally in every human being, such as deep sleep. Every night, you pass through stages of sleep in which mental activity slows dramatically, and in the deepest phase, slow wave sleep, there is almost no conscious thought. Yet when you wake up in the morning, you say, "I slept well." How do you know that? If consciousness had truly vanished, there would be no memory of rest. This suggests that some subtle form of awareness might persist, even when thought and sensory perception fade away. Neuroscientists studying sleep have identified three main stages: light sleep, deep sleep, and REM, rapid eye movement, sleep. During REM, the brain is highly active, producing dreams. These are essentially thought images that replace waking perception. But in deep, non-REM sleep, brain activity drops to its lowest level. Traditional science assumes that awareness is absent in this state, yet reports from meditators challenge that assumption. Advanced practitioners claim they can remain conscious even during dreamless sleep, aware of nothing but awareness itself. This is difficult to verify objectively, but EEG studies show that some meditators maintain unique brain patterns during deep sleep, unlike those of ordinary sleepers. If these reports are accurate, they offer an important clue. Awareness may not depend on thought or perception. It may exist independently as a continuous background presence that does not switch off when mental activity ceases. In ordinary life, we overlook this because our attention is always absorbed by content, by thoughts, sensations, and experiences. When content disappears, we assume awareness disappears too, just as we assume a movie screen vanishes when the film ends. But the screen remains. It is simply unnoticed. This analogy helps us understand why silence feels so radical. When the movie of thought stops, the mind expects darkness, but instead it finds the screen, pure, luminous awareness. This discovery can be so unexpected that words fail. Mystics across cultures have struggled to describe it, using metaphors like empty fullness, the groundless ground, or the vast sky. These phrases sound poetic, but they point to something concrete in experience: a state where there is no object to focus on, yet awareness is undeniably present. From a neuroscientific perspective, the challenge is that awareness without content does not generate obvious signals. Brain imaging relies on detecting changes, patterns of activity linked to thoughts or sensations. If there is awareness without objects, what would that look like on a scan? Some researchers speculate that it might involve a baseline level of integration across the brain, a kind of global coherence that sustains potential without actualizing specific representations. This is still a hypothesis, but early studies on advanced meditators hint at something like this: periods of sustained, low-frequency oscillations combined with bursts of high-frequency synchrony, suggesting a dynamic balance rather than a flat absence. Beyond the lab, the question becomes deeply personal. What does it mean for your sense of self if awareness persists without thought? Most of us define ourselves through mental narratives, our history, our roles, our plans. When these narratives fall silent, the usual sense of identity collapses. At first, this can feel like annihilation, but for many, it reveals something unexpected, a dimension of being that is not tied to any story. You discover that you are not the sum of your thoughts, but the space in which thoughts arise and dissolve. This insight has transformative implications. It means that your fundamental nature is untouched by the turbulence of the mind. Anxiety, fear, regret, these are patterns of thought. When thought subsides, so do they. What remains is a clarity that does not depend on circumstances. This is why contemplative traditions regard silence as the doorway to freedom. They do not advocate silence as an escape from life, but as a way of returning to life without the distortions of compulsive thinking. Consider how much energy is consumed by the constant production of thought. Even when you are doing nothing, the mind is busy rehearsing conversations, replaying past events, or worrying about the future. This mental noise creates a background tension that we hardly notice because it is always there. When it stops, the relief can be overwhelming. People who experience deep silence often describe it as a profound rest, more refreshing than sleep. Yet it is not unconsciousness, it is awareness without effort. This state is sometimes called pure consciousness, but that phrase can be misleading because it suggests an object called consciousness. In reality, it is the absence of objects, the bare capacity to know. And here lies one of the great paradoxes. You cannot grasp this state as a concept because concepts belong to thought. The moment you think, I am experiencing pure consciousness, thought has already returned. This is why teachers throughout history have emphasized direct experience over intellectual understanding. Silence cannot be understood by thinking about it. It can only be known by being it. So how can we approach this in practical terms? One method is to observe the spaces between thoughts. Thoughts come in sequences, like words in a sentence, but between them there are gaps, tiny pauses where no thought is present. Normally we overlook these gaps because we are so focused on the content. But if you pay attention, you can notice them, and as your attention stabilizes, the gaps begin to widen. In those gaps, you find the stillness that has been there all along. Another approach is to question the assumption that thoughts are necessary for awareness. Right now, ask yourself, what is my next thought going to be? Then wait. In that waiting, the mind becomes alert, but still, like a cat watching a mouse hole. You may notice that no thought comes immediately. For a moment, there is only awareness, poised and silent. That moment is a glimpse of what lies beyond the river of thinking. Modern research supports the value of these practices. Regular meditation has been shown to reduce stress, improve emotional regulation, and enhance cognitive flexibility. But beyond these benefits lies a more fundamental transformation: the recognition that you are not the thinker, but the awareness in which thinking happens. This shift can dissolve the compulsive identification with thought that drives so much of human suffering. Some might ask, if awareness without thought is so profound, why doesn't the mind stay there? The answer is that thought has evolutionary utility. It helps us survive, communicate, and innovate. The point is not to eliminate thought, but to see it for what it is: a tool, not the master of your life. When you understand this, you can use thought when needed, and return to silence when it is not. This is what some traditions call mastery, not control over everything, but freedom from unnecessary compulsion. It is also important to note that silence does not mean passivity. People who cultivate inner stillness often become more effective, not less, because their actions arise from clarity rather than reactivity. Decisions made from silence tend to be wiser because they are not clouded by fear or desire. Creativity also flourishes in this state because the mind is open, unburdened by habitual patterns. Many artists, scientists, and innovators have reported that their greatest insights came during moments of stillness, not while straining to think. Ultimately, the question of where you go when you stop thinking may have no definitive answer, because you, as a separate entity, may dissolve in the very act of asking. What remains cannot be captured in a concept, yet it is not foreign or distant. It is the most intimate reality, closer than the mind, more fundamental than any experience. It is what has been present through every moment of your life, unchanged amid all changes. And when you recognize that, even briefly, something shifts. You see that the silence you feared is not emptiness, but fullness, not loss, but liberation. When thought ceases, something remarkable happens. Awareness becomes self-evident. Ordinarily, we assume we are conscious because we think. Our thoughts reinforce a sense of being alive, of having a self. But silence reveals a paradox. Even when the mind stops, awareness does not. It is present without a narrative, awake without activity, vivid without content. In these moments, the mind's usual framework, memory, judgment, desire, loses its hold, and the raw experience of being comes to the forefront. Neuroscience provides intriguing insight into this phenomenon. Brain imaging studies show that when experienced meditators enter states of thoughtless awareness, regions associated with narrative self-construction, the medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex, and angular gyrus, deactivate, yet areas associated with attention and integration show increased connectivity. This suggests that mental silence is not equivalent to brain inactivity. On the contrary, it is a highly coherent state, with different parts of the brain functioning in harmony rather than in fragmented, habitual patterns. This harmony seems to correspond to what many describe as heightened clarity. When thoughts drop away, perception sharpens. Colours, sounds, and sensations are experienced directly, without conceptual filters. Time may feel suspended. The body may feel lighter, more expansive. Ordinary experiences, when encountered from this state, often appear extraordinary. This is not imagination. It is perception freed from interpretation, a direct contact with reality unmediated by the mind's endless commentary. Philosophically, the implications are profound. If awareness persists without thought, then the self, as normally conceived, is a construct. The I we identify with, the voice in our head, the story of our lives, is a temporary pattern within consciousness. When the pattern dissolves, what remains is the underlying awareness, which is not dependent on identity. This challenges deeply ingrained assumptions about existence. If the self is not the thinker, then what we call I is merely a function of thought, while consciousness itself is the foundation that allows any experience to arise. Practitioners of meditation often describe this as a liberation from the illusion of control. In everyday life, we believe we must manage our thoughts, organize our lives, and steer our identity. But silence exposes the truth. Awareness does not need direction. It simply is. Thoughts may arise, persist for a while, and fade, but awareness remains, untouched by the content it hosts. This recognition can be both liberating and unsettling, because it contradicts the sense of individuality that most people take for granted. Interestingly, altered states of consciousness often reveal this same principle. People who undergo sensory deprivation, extreme meditation retreats, or even intense flow experiences report similar phenomena. The dissolution of the usual mental chatter, the collapse of narrative identity, and the emergence of pure, selfless awareness. Even when external input is minimal, consciousness persists. This suggests that awareness is not contingent on sensory data or thought. It is more fundamental than the processes that normally define experience. Consider dreamless sleep for a moment. Deep, non-REM sleep is typically understood as a state of unconsciousness. Yet many meditators and contemplatives report being able to remain aware even while the brain enters its deepest sleep stages. EEG studies have confirmed unusual patterns in these individuals. High amplitude slow waves characteristic of deep sleep combined with markers of attention and alertness. This challenges conventional notions of consciousness and raises a critical question. What exactly is awareness, and how does it relate to brain activity? Some theorists propose that consciousness has layers. Ordinary waking thought represents one layer, active, narrative, and self-referential. Beneath it lies a deeper layer, pure awareness, which is not produced by thought, but simply is. The thinking self is like a cloud floating across the sky, temporary and ever-changing. Awareness is the sky itself, vast, silent, and unbounded. From this perspective, silence does not annihilate the self. It reveals the larger reality in which the self exists. This leads to an important insight about the nature of suffering. Most human distress arises from attachment to thought. We identify with narratives, fears, and desires, believing that they define us. When the mind becomes silent, those narratives temporarily dissolve, and with them, much of our habitual tension. What remains is a form of presence that is fundamentally untroubled, an awareness that is alive and awake but not entangled. This is why meditation and contemplative practices have profound psychological effects. They allow people to experience life without the constant interference of compulsive thought. Yet silence is not the absence of life. It is a different mode of engagement with it. People who enter states of thoughtless awareness report heightened creativity, sharper intuition, and a deeper sense of empathy. When the mind is quiet, the usual distractions vanish, and attention is free to operate in a holistic, integrated manner. This may explain why some of the greatest insights and innovations occur not in busy mental activity, but in moments of stillness. Thought may be necessary for action, but silence allows awareness to function at its highest capacity. There is also a temporal dimension to consider. Ordinary thinking produces a linear sense of time, past, present, future. When thought ceases, this linearity collapses. Time may appear to stretch, compress, or disappear altogether. This is not a trick of perception, it is a direct consequence of the absence of mental projection. Awareness is not bound by time because time exists in thought. In pure awareness, every moment is immediate, fully present, and complete in itself. In practical terms, cultivating this state does not require isolation or extraordinary effort. Small practices can help you notice the gaps between thoughts. Even a few seconds of noticing the absence of thought provides a taste of stillness. Over time, these glimpses accumulate, and you begin to recognize a dimension of awareness that is always present, even amid the busyness of life. This is not an escape from reality, it is a deeper engagement with it, a way of experiencing life directly rather than through the lens of constant mental commentary. The challenge is that the mind resists silence. Thoughts are habitual, automatic, and often overwhelming. The brain is wired to generate activity as a survival mechanism, to anticipate threats, and to plan for the future. This makes quieting the mind difficult, especially in a culture that rewards constant thinking, multitasking, and distraction. Yet the potential reward is enormous: freedom from the tyranny of thought, a clear perception of reality, and access to the deeper dimension of awareness that underlies all experience. When thought stops, awareness also reveals its relationship with perception. Ordinarily, we experience the world filtered through concepts, memories, and interpretations. When silence occurs, perception is raw and unmediated. Colours are more vivid, sounds more resonant, and bodily sensations more immediate. Life itself appears astonishing in its simplicity. What we call ordinary reality is often diminished by the fog of mental noise. When that fog lifts, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, not because the world has changed, but because the observer is now fully present. Perhaps most astonishingly, this state can be accessed at any time. It is not reserved for mystics or yogis. The potential for thoughtless awareness exists in every human being. It is always available, even if hidden beneath layers of mental chatter. The doorway is subtle, noticing a pause between thoughts, observing your breath, or simply becoming aware that you're aware. Once glimpsed, the reality of this silent presence is unmistakable. It is both intimately personal and universally accessible. When thought ceases, another subtle transformation occurs. Emotion begins to shift. Most of our feelings are entangled with thinking. Anxiety arises from imagining future scenarios. Sadness emerges from replaying past events. And desire is fueled by conceptualizing what is lacking. When thought quiets, these emotional currents lose their usual momentum. They may not disappear entirely, but they are no longer compulsive. Awareness experiences them, but without the need to identify with them, judge them, or resist them. Neuroscience offers some clarity here. The limbic system, including the amygdala and hippocampus, is deeply involved in emotional processing. During mental silence, research suggests a modulation of activity in these regions. In advanced meditators, functional MRI scans show decreased amygdala reactivity, meaning that fear and stress responses are dampened. Simultaneously, connectivity between areas associated with attention and self-awareness increases. The brain, in essence, shifts from a reactive mode to a reflective, integrated mode. Emotion remains, but it is observed rather than automatically reacted to. This shift has profound psychological implications. Normally, emotion is a driver of thought. A ripple of fear generates a chain of worry. A surge of excitement produces a flurry of planning. In silence, the ripple can occur, but the chain does not automatically form. You become the observer of emotional energy, not its prisoner. This is why many contemplative practitioners describe an inner spaciousness, a sense that there is room for emotion without being overwhelmed by it. Thoughts which usually fuel emotional turbulence are temporarily paused, revealing the raw clarity of awareness. Philosophically, this illustrates a central distinction. Awareness is not only independent of thought, it is also independent of emotion. While emotions colour experience, they are phenomena occurring within awareness, not constitutive of awareness itself. Awareness is the ground in which all feelings, sensations, and thoughts appear. When the mind is silent, you may notice the full spectrum of human experience without being caught in its fluctuations. This is a subtle but profound shift, revealing that life is richer and calmer than our habitual thinking allows us to perceive. Consider what happens in creative work or problem solving when thought stops temporarily. Many innovators and artists describe breakthroughs occurring in states of quiet. A scientist struggling with a complex problem might take a walk, sit in a silent room, or float in water. The problem seems to solve itself, not because the thinker is working harder, but because awareness, unbound by compulsive thought, integrates information in a different way. The brain remains active, but it is not dominated by the habitual chatter that constrains perception. This is the interplay between thought and silence. Silence does not mean inactivity. It means release from compulsive patterns, allowing natural intelligence to emerge. Even in ordinary life, this principle can be observed. When you pause during a conversation and simply listen, your awareness expands. You are not preoccupied with forming responses, planning the next move, or judging what you hear. In that brief silence, understanding deepens. Thoughts return, of course, but for a moment, clarity emerges precisely because the habitual mind is quiet. This is a practical demonstration of the power of thoughtless awareness. It is alive, perceptive, and fully present. From a neurophysiological perspective, these states are associated with particular patterns of brain activity. Theta waves, for instance, become more pronounced during deep meditation and creative flow. Theta is linked to relaxed attention and memory integration. Simultaneously, gamma waves, associated with coherent perception and high-level processing, can increase. This combination suggests that the brain operates in a highly efficient, integrated mode when thought is silent. It is neither dormant nor chaotic, but synchronized and alert. Awareness, in this state, functions with remarkable clarity. Philosophers have long noted that thought is often mistaken for awareness itself. We say, "I am thinking, therefore I exist," but this conflates the observer with the observed. In silence, this conflation dissolves. The thinker may disappear temporarily, but the presence that knows, awareness, remains. This challenges deeply held assumptions about identity. The I is a pattern of thought, but awareness is the constant in which all patterns appear. By observing this distinction directly, even for brief moments, one begins to understand the non-conceptual essence of being. The interplay of thought and emotion also reveals the importance of practice. Silence is not an instant achievement. It requires attention and discipline. Techniques like mindfulness, focused breathing, or noting the spaces between thoughts cultivate the capacity to observe without identifying. Over time, practitioners report that silence becomes more accessible, that the gaps between thoughts lengthen, and that awareness becomes more vivid. What was once rare becomes familiar. The mind, previously a river of unceasing noise, can enter a calm, lake-like state on demand. Yet even as silence deepens, the mind may occasionally resist. Thoughts, memories, and anticipations may rush in, like waves interrupting still water. The difference lies in response. In silence, awareness notices the intrusion without reacting. Thoughts are no longer commands, but passing phenomena. This distinction, observing without attachment, is central to understanding what happens when thought stops. You are not extinguishing life, you are seeing life in its unfiltered form. Interestingly, cultural reports of these experiences are remarkably consistent. From Buddhist meditation to Christian contemplation, Sufi mysticism to Advaita Vedanta, practitioners describe the same core phenomenon. The mind falls silent, identity temporarily dissolves, and pure awareness remains. Even the metaphors vary: emptiness, presence, light, sky. They converge on the same experiential truth. Awareness exists independently of thought, and silence is the portal through which it can be directly recognized. Modern research supports this convergence. Studies comparing long-term meditators from different traditions reveal strikingly similar brain patterns during thoughtless awareness. These patterns include decreased default mode activity, increased coherence between attention and sensory networks, and evidence of synchronized gamma oscillations. The scientific data aligns with experiential reports. Thoughtless awareness is a reproducible phenomenon, observable both subjectively and neurologically. In daily life, integrating this understanding has profound consequences. It can reduce stress, enhance creativity, and improve emotional regulation. It also reshapes our sense of identity. The self need not be tied to constant thought, achievements, or narrative. Silence reveals a more stable and luminous core, the awareness in which life unfolds. In this sense, mental silence is not a retreat from reality, but a return to it, unmediated and immediate. Finally, this exploration leads us to a fundamental insight. Awareness is not something we generate. It is always present, even when obscured by thought and emotion. Silence does not create awareness. It reveals what has always existed. The experience of thoughtless awareness is not a special state reserved for a few. It is the natural condition beneath the turbulence of mind. When thought stops, you do not vanish. You return to what you have always been, a luminous presence, aware and alive, free from narrative, open to reality in its simplest and most profound form. One of the most striking consequences of thoughtless awareness is the transformation of time perception. Ordinarily, we experience life through a linear timeline: past, present, and future. Memory recalls what was, imagination anticipates what might be, and thought weaves these into a continuous story. But when thinking stops, this temporal scaffold collapses. The linear sense of time, which depends on mental projection, no longer holds. Moments stretch, compress, or vanish altogether. In silence, there is only the immediacy of the present. Neuroscience provides some insight into this phenomenon. Studies on experienced meditators have shown that areas of the brain responsible for temporal processing, including the posterior parietal cortex and insular regions, demonstrate altered activity during states of thoughtless awareness. These changes correlate with subjective reports of timelessness. The brain is still active, yet it is no longer engaged in projecting past and future. Awareness experiences itself directly, unmediated by the sequential framework that usually structures consciousness. This shift in time perception can have profound effects on human experience. Anxiety, stress, and regret are largely products of temporal projection. Fear arises from imagining future threats. Sorrow emerges from revisiting past losses. In silence, these patterns lose their grip. Awareness rests in the present, encountering life without judgment or expectation. Even brief glimpses of this state can produce remarkable emotional relief, revealing that most of what troubles the mind is constructed, not real in the immediacy of now. Alongside altered time perception, sensory experience can become markedly intensified. Normally, perception is filtered through concepts and judgments. We see a tree not as it is, but as a tree, an object labeled and categorized. In thoughtless awareness, these conceptual filters relax. The tree is perceived in its raw vibrancy, the texture of its bark, the subtle rustle of its leaves, the interplay of sunlight through its branches. Colours, sounds, and sensations can appear richer, sharper, and more immersive. This is not imagination, it is perception freed from the interpretive overlay of thought. Philosophically, this points to a profound insight. The richness of experience is independent of mental commentary. Thought often limits experience by imposing categories, expectations, and judgments. When thought pauses, perception becomes unmediated. Life is no longer experienced through the lens of narrative, it is directly felt, astonishing in its simplicity and depth. Moments that seemed ordinary before suddenly reveal themselves as extraordinary, because the observer, the mind, is quiet, allowing the fullness of awareness to shine. The potential for self-transcendence emerges naturally from these experiences. Normally, the self is defined by thought, memories, identities, preferences, and expectations. When thinking ceases, these markers dissolve. The boundaries of the self temporarily fade. Some describe a sensation of merging with the environment, a feeling of boundlessness, or even an awareness that extends beyond the body. Neurologically, this may be related to decreased activity in the parietal lobes, which normally help define the sense of bodily boundaries. With these areas less active, the distinction between self and other can soften, giving rise to experiences of unity and interconnectedness. This phenomenon has been reported in a wide variety of contexts. Meditators, contemplatives, and even people in spontaneous flow states or moments of intense awe describe a similar sense of self-dissolution. Despite cultural differences, the core experience converges. The mind quiets, the sense of separateness diminishes, and pure awareness is revealed. From a philosophical perspective, this suggests that identity is not intrinsic but conditional, dependent on thought. Awareness, however, is not conditional. It exists independently of identity, and it is in this independence that liberation is glimpsed. The interplay of thought cessation and emotional clarity is equally profound. Emotions that usually dominate experience, fear, desire, longing, anger, remain as raw energy but without the compulsion of narrative. They arise and dissolve in awareness, noticed but not clung to. In this state, life can be experienced as a series of vivid impressions, rich and dynamic, yet fundamentally free. Emotional responses no longer dictate perception or behavior. They are observed phenomena passing through a field of unshakable awareness. Practical techniques for accessing this state involve noticing the spaces between thoughts and focusing on immediate sensory experience. Paying attention to the breath, ambient sounds, or bodily sensations can anchor awareness in the present. As the mind quiets, gaps between thoughts widen. In these gaps, perception is direct and unfiltered. Even a few seconds of this experience can profoundly shift one's relationship with thought, emotion, and identity. The capacity to enter this state repeatedly can deepen over time with consistent practice, making thoughtless awareness more accessible and integrated into daily life. Remarkably, this state is not passive. While thought may be quiet, awareness is highly responsive, alert, and vibrant. Cognitive processing can occur without the overlay of habitual mental chatter. Insights, creative solutions, and deep understanding often arise spontaneously. This reveals a paradox. Silence is not inactivity, it is an organized, dynamic state of integrated awareness, functioning at a level not dominated by compulsive thought. Cultural traditions have long recognized the transformative potential of this state. In Zen Buddhism, it is called no mind, a state where thought has temporarily ceased, but consciousness is fully present. In Advaita Vedanta, it is the recognition of the self as pure awareness, unbound by the mental constructs that usually define identity. Mystics from all continents and eras describe the same essential experience. The mind quiets, identity fades, and a luminous awareness is revealed. Science, philosophy, and personal experience converge on the insight that thoughtless awareness is both natural and fundamental. Even in ordinary contexts, glimpses of this state occur spontaneously. Athletes report in the zone, experiences where time slows, perception sharpens, and the self recedes. Musicians describe moments when performance flows effortlessly, without deliberate thought, yet with perfect precision. Writers and thinkers often find their most profound insights emerging in quiet intervals between deliberate mental effort. In these instances, silence is not emptiness, it is heightened presence, a field in which creativity and understanding arise organically. When we explore the integration of thoughtless awareness into daily life, we begin to see its subtle yet profound influence. Thoughtless awareness is not a state reserved for meditation cushions or silent retreats. It can be brought into ordinary moments. The key lies in observing the mind rather than being caught in it. Awareness itself does not require a special technique. It simply needs to be noticed, rested in, and allowed to function without interference from habitual mental chatter. One practical method is mindfulness of experience. You can focus on the breath, bodily sensations, or the sounds around you. As you do this, thoughts will inevitably arise. The practice is not to stop them forcibly, but to observe them as passing phenomena, much like clouds drifting across the sky. With repeated attention, the spaces between thoughts lengthen, and the underlying awareness becomes more vivid. This is the essence of thoughtless awareness. It is not about suppression of thought, but about disentangling awareness from identification with thought. Neuroscience supports this approach. Studies show that regular mindfulness practice increases functional connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and other regions of the brain associated with attention and emotion regulation. These structural and functional changes correlate with improved cognitive flexibility, emotional stability, and the ability to sustain attention. In other words, cultivating thoughtless awareness is not merely a spiritual exercise. It is a way of rewiring the brain for clarity, balance, and adaptability. The relationship between mind and consciousness becomes clearer in this process. The mind generates thoughts, sensations, and memories. Consciousness is the field in which these phenomena appear. Ordinarily, we mistake the mind for consciousness. We believe that thinking is necessary for awareness, or that our identity depends on the story our mind tells. But when we practice observing the mind, the distinction emerges. Thoughts are temporary patterns. Awareness is constant. It is like noticing ripples on a pond without confusing them for the water itself. Emotion is similarly clarified in thoughtless awareness. Without compulsive identification, feelings can be observed without reactivity. Anger arises, is noted, and dissolves. Joy emerges, is fully felt, and flows naturally. Life becomes a continuous stream of vivid, direct experience, unfiltered by judgment or conceptual overlay. This does not mean emotions disappear. They are simply no longer drivers of compulsive mental activity. Awareness witnesses them without clinging, which brings profound freedom and balance to daily living. Time perception, too, shifts. Without the constant pull of mental narrative, past and future lose their dominance. Moments are fully present, experienced as complete and rich in themselves. This is not the erasure of memory or planning, but a recalibration of attention. You can remember the past, anticipate the future, and act effectively, yet still rest in the immediacy of now. The mind ceases to dominate perception, and awareness becomes the primary lens through which life is experienced. Many contemplative traditions emphasize the value of returning to this awareness repeatedly. Even brief moments of noticing the gap between thoughts can have cumulative effects. The more often you access this space, the more it becomes a stable dimension of experience. Life begins to feel less fragmented. The constant chatter of worry and planning diminishes. Decisions can be made from clarity rather than impulse. Relationships deepen because you are present with others, not preoccupied with internal narrative. Creativity flourishes because the mind is unburdened and receptive to insight. The paradox of thoughtless awareness is that it is both effortless and profound. You do not need to create it, you need only to notice it, yet its effects ripple outward. A mind resting in awareness is calmer, more integrated, and more resilient. Stress is reduced not because external circumstances change, but because the habitual reaction to them diminishes. Emotional turbulence is softened because it is experienced without clinging. Clarity arises because the distractions of thought are suspended, allowing perception to unfold directly. Neurologically, this may explain why some of the most transformative experiences of consciousness occur in silence. Advanced meditators show unique patterns of brain activity: decreased default mode, network function, increased gamma coherence, and synchronized oscillations across cortical regions. These patterns correspond to subjective reports of clarity, insight, and the dissolution of ego boundaries. Awareness remains vivid and alert, even as the narrative self fades. The mind is quiet, yet life is fully present, richer than before. Practical integration into daily life involves small, intentional actions. Pauses throughout the day, moments of attention to breath, surroundings, or simple activity allow awareness to stabilize. During conversations, focusing on listening rather than responding can open a window into thoughtless awareness. In routine tasks, noticing the sensory experience of movement, touch, or sound can bring the mind into the present. Over time, these repeated engagements cultivate a baseline of awareness accessible in nearly any circumstance. Another dimension of integration is the recognition that thoughtless awareness does not replace thought, it contextualizes it. Thought remains a vital tool for problem solving, planning, and creativity. Silence is not about avoidance or escape. It is a recalibration, a way of letting thought operate without dominating perception. Thoughts can flow, but they are no longer tyrants. They become tools at the service of awareness rather than the rulers of experience. Philosophically, this insight has profound consequences. It suggests that identity, which we often cling to as fixed and essential, is in fact fluid. The I is a pattern within consciousness, impermanent and dependent on thought. Awareness, by contrast, is stable, luminous, and independent of narrative. Realizing this distinction can reduce fear, enhance presence, and foster a deeper sense of freedom. Life is not controlled by the mind, it is witnessed by awareness, which is always present, always silent, and always alive. The potential for transformation is significant. By cultivating thoughtless awareness, we develop emotional resilience, perceptual clarity, and a sense of grounded freedom. Stress and anxiety diminish not because the external world changes, but because the internal environment of awareness becomes stable. Creativity emerges naturally because the mind, unbound by habitual patterns, can perceive connections and possibilities without obstruction. Relationships deepen because presence replaces preoccupation. And most fundamentally, a direct recognition arises. Consciousness exists independently of thought, and in resting within it, life can be experienced more fully, directly, and richly than previously imagined. Thoughtless awareness, then, is not a distant goal or mystical secret. It is accessible, natural, and profoundly transformative. By noticing the spaces between thoughts, observing without identification, and resting in presence, you can experience life in a fundamentally different way. Awareness becomes the ground from which all experience arises, the still point in the midst of motion, the luminous presence behind the currents of mind. Hello again, and as we reach the conclusion of this exploration, it is worth returning to the question that inspired it. Where do you go when you stop thinking? Tonight, as your mind rests and you prepare for sleep, we consider not only the silence of thought, but the enduring presence of awareness that underlies all experience. In the quiet, we discover a truth that is both simple and profound. When thought stops, you do not vanish. You return to the awareness that has always been present, the ground in which all thoughts, emotions, and sensations arise. Throughout this journey, we have seen that thought is a tool, remarkable, necessary, and powerful. But it is not the master of reality. Thought represents, interprets, and predicts, but it can never capture the fullness of experience itself. When the mind becomes silent, the layers of interpretation dissolve. What remains is not empty, but luminous, direct, and immediate. Awareness is the constant beneath the flux of experience. This is the awareness that watches a sunrise without labeling it, that hears music without analysis, that feels emotion without attachment. Sleep provides a natural portal into this state. During deep, dreamless sleep, the brain slows its activity and the narrative self recedes. Yet awareness, subtle and continuous, may persist beneath the surface. Meditative traditions and modern research both suggest that this form of awareness is accessible even while the mind appears inactive. What science measures as silence is not the cessation of consciousness, but a shift from active thought to foundational presence. This is why rest feels restorative, and why even in sleep, we sometimes awaken refreshed, as if part of us has remained alert to life itself. The practical integration of thoughtless awareness into daily life is not about escaping the world, it is about engaging with it differently. Moments of silence, attention to breath, mindfulness in ordinary activities, these cultivate a stable recognition of awareness beneath thought. Emotional reactivity softens, perception sharpens, and life becomes richer. Creativity, insight, and empathy flourish when the mind is free from habitual chatter. Awareness itself becomes a source of clarity, guidance, and calm. Time, as we have discussed, is experienced differently in silence. Linear chronology loses its dominance, and each moment is encountered fully. Past and future exist, but they no longer control perception. This timelessness is not a theoretical concept, but a lived experience. In sleep, in meditation, or in the brief gaps between thoughts, we glimpse this spaciousness. We understand that our existence is not defined by the stories we tell ourselves, but by the awareness in which those stories arise and dissolve. Emotion, too, is transformed. Normally, feelings are intertwined with thought, driving compulsive reactions. In thoughtless awareness, emotions appear and pass without domination. Fear, joy, longing, and calm coexist, observed rather than clung to. This creates a profound sense of freedom and balance. It is not indifference, it is clarity. Life can be experienced directly, vibrantly, and without unnecessary turbulence. Awareness witnesses the fullness of experience without being overwhelmed. From a neurological perspective, silence does not mean inactivity. Brain activity becomes more integrated and coherent, reflecting a state of calm alertness. The default mode network quiets. Connectivity between attention and sensory regions strengthens, and oscillatory patterns shift toward greater coherence. This suggests that the brain is functioning in a mode of high efficiency, supporting perception, creativity, and insight while freeing awareness from compulsive narrative thought. The mind is quiet, yet alive. Philosophically, thoughtless awareness challenges the assumptions we carry about self, identity, and existence. The I we normally inhabit is a construct, a pattern of thought that arises and dissolves. Awareness, by contrast, is unconstructed, timeless, and universal. Recognizing this distinction allows a direct experience of freedom. The self is not lost. It is contextualized within something larger, something constant. Thought may arise and pass, but the field of awareness remains. It is the canvas upon which all of life unfolds. As you prepare for sleep tonight, imagine resting not only your body, but also your mind. Let thought pause. Notice the spaces between ideas, the subtle gaps where silence resides. Feel the awareness that observes, the luminous presence that has been there all along. Allow yourself to rest in that quiet, knowing that even in the absence of thought, life is vivid, alive, and whole. Sleep becomes a continuation of this awareness, a gentle immersion in the silent, radiant field beneath mental activity. The practice of resting in awareness does not require mastery or extraordinary effort. It begins with small, intentional moments, a pause, a breath, a noticing of presence. Over time, these moments accumulate, creating a deep familiarity with the silence beneath thought. You may discover that the stillness you sought externally has always existed internally. Thoughtless awareness is not a distant state. It is a natural condition of consciousness accessible at any moment if you allow yourself to notice and rest. Even as you drift into sleep, awareness continues its quiet presence. Dreamless sleep does not equate to unconsciousness. The substrate of consciousness may remain, subtle yet alive. In this sense, sleep is not the end of experience, but a shift in its expression, a temporary suspension of narrative thought while awareness rests in its own clarity. And when morning comes, you awaken not from emptiness, but from the luminous continuity of being itself. The beauty of thoughtless awareness is that it is both personal and universal. Each individual can access it, yet it is the same awareness that underlies all experience. In silence, you are fully yourself, yet intimately connected to the fabric of reality. Life in this state is neither cluttered nor diminished. It is alive, rich, and immediate. It is the ground upon which every thought, emotion, and sensation arises. the constant behind the changing, the stillness within motion. So tonight, as you close your eyes and prepare for rest, let thought soften. Allow the mind to pause. Trust the awareness that has always been present. Experience the spaciousness, the clarity, and the luminous stillness that lies beneath the current of thinking. Sleep becomes a gentle extension of this awareness, a silent, restorative immersion in the field of consciousness itself. And in this simple, profound act, you touch the essence of life, awake, alive, and free.